Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. We are here for a pre-Christmas edition of Highway to Hoover, getting you through the holiday season. So hello out there if you are driving to, grandma's house or heading to the airport, or you're sitting on a plane, or you're hiding in a guest bedroom trying to escape having awkward or troublesome conversations with family members.
Or you're
Whatever it
watching
is.
a bad bowl game and you need a break.
Yeah, more on that in just a second. But yeah, so however you're listening to us during this holiday season, first of all, happy holidays to you and your family. And thank you for being along the ride with us, not just today, but throughout the entirety of 2023. Looking forward to doing this a lot more in 2024. Mark and I are going to do a little bit. I don't even know what to really call this episode. I titled it "What We Do and Don't Know About the SEC." So some of this is going to look back. Some of this is going to look forward. We'll explain it a little bit better as we get into it. But before we jump into that, I have to let you know that this episode of Highway to Hoover and every episode of Highway to Hoover is brought to you by Pitch Logic, the system used by players, coaches, scouts, and instructors at all levels of play, from youth leagues to the big leagues. The easy-to-use and affordable technology makes the platform accessible to every player at every level. All the metrics and features used at the highest level of our sport. See pitchlogic.com for more information. Mark, before we get into the baseball stuff, you mentioned bowl games. I actually wanted to start there. I will throw it out there and say that I am pro bowl game. I understand why they're not as big a deal. I understand why some of them are objectively bad. But I just feel like they're not really hurting anybody. Yeah. So I'm pro bowl game. Where do you come down on that?
Yeah, we're aligned here. If you don't care, don't watch them, because I certainly don't watch several of them, and some of them, hey, I've got time and they're on, and yeah, that they're white noise in the background sometimes. But then if it's close at the end, hey, you pick a side and you're all in, right? And I enjoy that. I do think that next year is going to be interesting with the expanded playoff, how that affects the bowl games, and maybe some matter a whole lot less, even than they do now, believe it or not. But those playoff games, you got 12 teams that care instead of 4. Sign me up for that. More good teams playing each other. That's what I want.
I'm with you. Yeah, next year in particular in college football is going to be interesting with that, because it's my understanding that a lot of the existing bowl agreements come up at the end of 2025.
Yeah.
And so next year is going to be kind of a mashup.
Yeah.
And so I'll be interested to see what happens, because unless some bowls are going to go away, and that happens occasionally, unless some bowls are going to go away, we already have a situation where we've gotten to the point where every year we have either some 5 and 7 teams playing, or in this year, in this case, they let Jacksonville State and James Madison play in bowl games when they otherwise would not have let them, in order to fill out the bowl spots. So next year, when we have the playoffs, and some of those will be bowl games, I'm sure, but not every round is going to be bowl games. I imagine not. Maybe I'm wrong, but the math is just not going to work out. So next year will be kind of messy, I think, to figure out from a bowl standpoint.
Yeah, not to mention what happens to the Pac-12 affiliated bowls that no longer have Pac-12 teams.
Yeah, I read a story about that on The Athletic the other day. Go check it out if you're interested in that, kind of the behind the scenes logistic stuff, because I found it kind of interesting. And the conclusion of which seemed to be just like a shrug of the shoulders, like, we'll figure it out. Yeah. One of the things, just real quick, I mean, I love a couple of things about bowl games. One is just like, this past Monday, I watched Western Kentucky play Old Dominion at 2:30 in the afternoon on a Monday in front of what looked like 5,000 people in Charlotte's on-campus stadium. That, by the way, I referred to as the Chris Finwood Bowl. Old Dominion head coach, baseball coach, Chris Finwood is now at Old Dominion. He used to be the head coach at Western Kentucky. So that's beautiful. Like, we start to get more of those next week, where we just have random weekdays that have 4 games. We kind of have a smattering now. The other thing is, it's not true anymore, but what got me into bowl games, and I think you could argue what got me into college football more broadly, is I specifically remember watching a bowl game. This is probably the late 90s, early aughts. and I saw Boise State play, and I was like, Boise State? Like, what is that? And Dan Hawkins, I think, was the head coach at the time, who went on to coach at Colorado. I just and the announcers were talking about, oh, this is a really good Boise State, or maybe Dirk Cutter was the head coach. I forget which, but this Boise State program is really consistent. They're a big winner at the time, the WAC, and I just thought, I had no idea they had a football program. And so when was I ever going to get to see Boise State play? Right. And so bowl games presented that opportunity. And so that's kind of how I got into it. And now there's such an oversaturation. If there's an FBS team out there you want to watch, buddy, you can watch them every weekend, basically. Right. It gets a little sticky if you're, talking about a CUSA team or Mountain West or whatever. But for the most part, like, games are easy to come by. As long as you have ESPN Plus, you got pretty much all of it. So, but back in those days, as you know, like, the bowl games were sometimes the only time you'd get to see some of these teams. And it was like opening up a Christmas gift, where it's like, oh, what is this team? Let me learn everything I can about this team by watching this game this team I've never heard of and know nothing about. Like, I found that really exciting as a kid. And, some of that has just been lost because of now, again, the glut of games available.
Yeah. And, as I'm referred to, I used to love bowl games. I mean, they mattered to the fans, they mattered to the teams, the coaches, the players. Now, not so much, right? And they're just sort of an exhibition at this point. And it certainly has taken the luster off of it. But there's still that, that excitement when those pairings come out and you see who's playing who, and then all of a sudden, you get that, those few matchups that really do get you fired up. It really, can fill the time and become appointment viewing, right? And there are a few of those this year. So excited to get this going, and this is the perfect time of the year because a lot of people are off work, a lot of people are sitting around. Maybe you don't want to talk to to Uncle Willard and Aunt,
especially once he's gotten into the Miller Lights,
Yeah, exactly. Maybe football's the right play here.
Yeah, no doubt. It is a good time of year for that. It is also a good time of year for, just talking a little bit about SEC baseball, I guess. Mm-hmm. The thing about these episodes, Mark, is that if the folks listen to this on December 21st, the day this is released, those are your diehards. Like, this is our core constituency right here. If you're listening to this in the month of December, salute to you. Yeah. You are the people we are trying to reach here with Highway to Hoover and SEC Extra more broadly. So a salute to you, and thanks for being along with us. Mark, let's introduce our topic a little bit tonight. We're kind of loosely calling it what we do and don't know about the SEC. So we're going to talk about three big picture topics here. The first one is, what is something that happened in the last 12 months, so basically just last season, that changed the way what you believe about a team or a concept or something, right? So what do you feel differently about now than you did a year ago? That's one.
Yeah.
Two.
I got three of them.
Okay. Wow. We're going to be cooking with gas. The second is, what's a team in the SEC you have a really good feel for coming out of the fall? Now, it doesn't mean you're going to be right? I mean, anything can happen, but a team that you feel like, hey, I know what this team is going to be. And the last one is kind of the fun one, which is, here's a team that I have no idea what's going to happen. Yeah. And that's kind of fun because that's where we all learn together and learn about a team on the fly. So we will wrap with that one. Mark, I will let you hit lead off, because if you have three of them, then we're going to let you empty the clip here a little bit. Give us your examples of something you believe now that you didn't a year ago.
Well, I thought that NIL would be a parity maker, right? It sort of has been in football. You see the Georgias and Alabamas and Ohio State, they can't stockpile talent the way they once did because people want to play, right? And they're leaving. And I thought that, it's true in the most high profile sport. So I kind of expected that to happen elsewhere, right? I don't believe it is. I believe in our sport, specifically in our league, that because of the roster size, because of the way that you can pluck talent from mid-majors or smaller teams, or sometimes equivalent teams, to fill those holes in your team, I don't know that you're going to get parity. I think the rich are going to get richer, and the teams that have the established NIL programs, the teams that have the large budgets, the teams that are winning today, basically, and the teams that can establish those things in the future, they're going to have the most success because they're going to have the best players, and they're going to continue to recruit really well in the through the high school ranks. And then maybe they have a guy who doesn't pan out, maybe they have an injury, maybe they have whatever, and they'll just go supplement. And I do think that because of that, and I was expecting this might level the playing field a little bit. I don't think it will. I really think that based on what we've seen to this point, that you're going to have a lot more dream team type of clubs. Now, we can get into a discussion about the health of the sport with that, and different, people can have different opinions on it. But what I will tell you is, if ratings matter, people like those star-studded teams. People watch when you have multiple good players on one team. Okay, gives them multiple ways to build connections, multiple ways to enjoy that team. And ratings and popularity don't necessarily equal health. I'm not making that correlation, but from a popularity standpoint, this is only going to help the sport. Okay, now maybe from a competitive equity standpoint, we can have a different discussion, but I do think that that, I guess, to put a bow on this, I thought that people wouldn't want to sit and they would move elsewhere, and I think that's happening. But the people that are taking their place are the best players on the other teams that those players go to. And you're getting those trades of a player who's maybe non-established for one who is, and they're plugging it in. Okay. So that's the first. I'll let you go, and then I've got a couple I'll be brief on.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one, and it's a big picture topic that I hadn't really considered for this. And look, the transfer portal and transfers in general are a living, breathing organism.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the big picture things I'm fascinated with, just as an aside here, is that I think what the transfer portal is just going to take on a lot of different looks over the years. Like I wonder,
Yeah.
and this might not affect baseball as much as it affects the more high profile sports, the men's and women's basketball, and then football, is there just seems to be a lot of chaos. There's always been chaos in the transfer portal, but you add to it the confusion over that deal a couple of weeks ago. And look, I'm not the guy to go to for like complex NCAA legislation, courtroom stuff,
Yeah.
but the idea, it's like, oh no, yeah, anybody who like is looking for a second time transfer waiver, like you can just play now. And then the NCAA is like, well, sure, but we may later find you ineligible. And like, that's chaotic. And then,
Yeah, I definitely have some thoughts on that. I mean, if you're going to allow multi-transfers, right? So you can play your freshman year at Alabama and your sophomore year at Auburn and your junior year at Georgia and your senior year at Florida, and then maybe there's a fifth year in there, so you get granted for whatever reason, COVID or whatever, and you go somewhere else. How are you progressing in your life, man? If you're in a new place, certainly from a degree standpoint, from a continuity standpoint, that's got to be really challenging. I mean, that would be difficult for me as an old, right? But as a college kid, how are you going to manage that, right? And I know that's an extreme example, but you're talking about the ability to just leave whenever you want. Hey, the coach was mean to me today. I'm leaving, right? And I don't know, that to me is problematic. Um, I think in the past we were very restrictive with what we allowed players to do, and I think we've overcompensated. And if this thing goes in, we're definitely overcompensating. Okay, so I'm not exactly sure the right balance for this, but I know it's not playing at a new, going to a new university all 4 or 3 years out of your 4, right? That's too much. Okay. I don't know what the right number is, but that seems like excessive to me as, just someone with life experience who, has dealt with change a little bit.
It's why I've long said, for those who are really freaked out about the transfer portal, you should take solace in the fact that transferring is a real pain in the rear end.
Yeah.
And people don't like I think there's an assumption that a lot of players are out there just kind of trying to stick their hand out and transfer at the drop of a hat. And look, there are certain players that's probably true of, but for the most part, you went to that college for a reason, and chances are you made some friends, and you might even have a significant other now. And like, or heck, for that matter, academics, right? Like, I like this program. I want to go be this or that or whatever, and this is best for me. So like, these players don't just want to transfer like as a compulsion, like they're looking for opportunities, but there's also just other chaos out there too with I think early on, there was an opportunity for advisors. And this is especially true in baseball, a sport where you can get drafted out of high school and then elect to go to college and then wait out a couple of years. So you've kind of had an advisor your entire time there, whereas a football player might not have had an advisor until it was clear that he was a NFL prospect, right? Yeah. And, you hear kind of those horror stories of advisors pushing kids into the portal and, then trying to get NIL money for them, but then taking a huge chunk for themselves. And I do wonder if those stories kind of making the rounds, whereas in the first couple of years of the transfer portal, a kid might have been naive to that and thinking like, this is just how it works. That now maybe not. And so maybe that curtails some of it. We're all just really speculating here, but I say all that to say, this 5 years from now, like not only, college athletics is probably going to look a lot different in 5 years, much less 10 years, but even if everything else stayed the same, I think the shape of the transfer portal is just bound to look different as we go through different iterations of this thing. Mm-hmm. I think that's just inevitable.
All right.
All right. We'll I'll speed through a little bit of this here. So one of mine is that I think in the modern, I've kind of thought this over the years, but let me put it this way. In the SEC, we tend to hyperfixate, understandably, on the pitchers. And that is a lot of what sets the SEC apart, right? Think about the most dynamic arms we've seen in college baseball in the last few years, right? You Skeens, obviously, Dolander, Kamar Rocker, Jack Leiter, Jack Caglione, I guess, in terms of at least talent, right? Florida's had some guys. So that is kind of what sets the SEC apart in a lot of ways. But with that being said, I think what I've changed my mind on is that you have to hit in this league. Yeah. I'm not so sure you can just pitch your way to being an elite team. And, maybe Vanderbilt will test that this year, right? If the offense doesn't come around, and there are questions there, but I just, yeah. So the idea, funny enough, the idea is just the idea that you can just kind of pitch your way to it and just do enough offensively, I think I just don't know if I believe that as much anymore, given that, the offensive talent has also just become bonkers in this league, but then secondarily is just, it's a really offensive environment in college baseball. Especially when the weather gets warm, that ball just jumps. And hey, look, you might strike out a bunch of dudes, but if you're throwing 98, that ball's going to come off the bat at 110, and you're going to give up some long balls. You just are. And if you're not able to fight fire with that kind of thing, I think you can pitch your way to being really good. I'm just not so sure you can, be SEC champion good or national title good or anything like that, because you have got to swing the bats. And this is not an SEC thing, but look at last year in the College World Series. Wake Forest pitched about as well as you could ever pitch. Mm-hmm. Like, there's really nothing they did wrong on the mound the entire time. They couldn't score runs. And, again, that's an ACC club, but let's be honest, it was an SEC talent club.
Oh, yeah. It will be again this year.
Yeah, for sure. So, but I think the point stands, whereas if you're gonna win big on that kind of level, like, I think you've got to be able to slug a little bit. And I'd love to be wrong, because one of the things I like about baseball as a sport, even in the professional level, is you can win a lot of different ways. There's really more than one way to skin the cat, but it feels a little bit like that's less true these days, just given the offensive environment. So
yeah, I agree completely.
Yeah. What else you got, Mark?
Yeah, I think one thing is Butch Thompson will figure it out at Auburn.
That was my actually my other one. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
He's got the culture in a place, and go back and find the story that we did this fall on Butch Thompson is building, how his approach to coaching and culture. He doesn't like that word, but had the process, we'll call it, what he's doing at Auburn, and I do think that it just goes to show you what that steadying hand, what that consistency, what that caring approach and leadership principles can do, in the most cutthroat league in the country. Because Auburn was not the most talented team last year, and they hosted a regional. And he's just one of those difference makers in the dugout that everybody wants and very few have. Okay, so then the other one, Jay Johnson's going to be able to handle the portal lights, right? I know I was pretty outspoken. I know a lot of people were. LSU's biggest obstacle last year was LSU. I felt like they would win the title unless they got in their own way, because they were the most talented team. And usually in our sport, the most talented team doesn't win. And that was interesting to me, to see how you handle all that talent and all those egos, and then you go out and you win the title, and then you bring in more of those guys this year, to more new people, to take positions away from your existing people or existing players, and how you manage that. Right. That's fascinating to me anyway. And part of what we're going to roll out for our season preview is, I sat down with Jay and talked about that. Is how do you handle this? Right. Everybody thinks they have the answer. Well, you just did it. So what can you share? Right. And I do think that's a big part of our sport. Everybody loves, hey, LSU's got all this talent. Oh, they have NIL money. They have the great fan support. They have all these advantages that other teams don't have. But that alone doesn't win you games. All right. You've got to be able to implement it and keep people pointed in the same direction. And he did that last year. And I think that's a part of sport. Going forward is how you accumulate that talent, and how you all, remain on the same page when people have to sit, because there's only so many at bats and so many innings.
That's a good call. I think that's something that I thought was really impressive about what LSU did last season, was just that they gave a proof of concept for, hey, you can win this way. Like it's maybe a difficult needle to thread. And I think if they had brought back the same team, it'd be more difficult the second year, because everyone starts to like feel themselves a little bit more, So yeah, that's a good call there. All right, let's move on to the next little stage here. We're going to go to our teams that we have a good feel for, and I'll go first. And I think we know what Kentucky's going to be, right? They're going to basically run back what they did last year, and hard to argue with the results, right? But this is going to be a team that fields the ball, at least on paper, at an elite level. I mean, you're looking at a defense that includes Grant Smith, who might be the best steadiest shortstop in the country. Not the flashiest, but maybe the steadiest shortstop in the country. Emilian Pitre, who would play shortstop like basically anywhere else at second base. The most likely third baseman is Mitchell Daly from Texas, who played shortstop at Texas.
Right.
And then they've got a big 6'4" lefty first baseman, Ryan Nicholson from Cincinnati, who can really pick it over there. On top of that, you've got Devin Burks at catcher, who could have gone pro if he wanted. You've got Ty Crittenberger, who can really run, like plus runner in center field. And so, I mean, that's makes up a core of an excellent defense. And last year, Kentucky tied for first place with Oral Roberts for the best fielding percentage in the country. And I think they're going to be right there again. Look, somebody boots a ball once or twice more and you finish 8th in the country or whatever. But I think they're going to be on that kind of level defensively. Offensively, I think they're also going to be action oriented because, again, you've got good athletes, you've got speed everywhere. You've got some guys, I think there's actually an opportunity they might hit with a little more power this year. They're not going to be, what LSU was last year or any number of other SEC clubs were last year, but Nicholson's got pop. I think there's more in the tank for Devin Burks. If Ryan McCoy can actually have the breakout season that we thought he might have last year, he's got some pop. Nolan McCarthy, maybe a breakout guy there. Like, he's got some pop. So they may hit with a little more power. I don't think it's going to be their calling card. And then on the mound, they've got Travis Smith, Mason Moore. Like, I think they're going to throw a bunch of strikes. They're not going to be a team that strikes out 15 per 9 innings or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they don't have anybody that's going to transform into Paul Skeens overnight, but they're going to throw a bunch of strikes. They've got a bunch of numbers. They're going to give you a bunch of different looks on the mound. And what's interesting about that team too, I feel like we have a good feel for what they're going to be, but we'll have to see if they can be as successful with it, right? Because they work on pretty thin margins. Just because they play low scoring games, they play close games.
That's a good point.
And last year, a lot went right, not just in terms of the way they performed, but also you look at their schedule with the way they scheduled. They played Elon. Elon turned out to be good, like top 65 in RPI. Wright State was 80 in RPI. Indiana State obviously was like top 10 in RPI for a lot of the year. They played Indiana in the midweek. They played Xavier in the midweek. Both those teams were better last year than they had been in a while. So a lot of things broke right for Indiana to do exactly what they did last year. So it's possible this team is just as good, but just doesn't get the breaks they got last year. So that'll be kind of interesting to see how that goes, because like I said, I believe in the what they're doing, but when you're working on that thin a margin, it doesn't take much for your fortunes to really, really change there. So yeah, Mark, what do you got for your team? You have a good feel for?
Yeah. I believe in Arkansas. Right. Maybe offensively they aren't going to be quite as strong as last year, but I don't think they're going to have to be. I think they're going to be solid offensively, and they're going to pitch so much better because they're deeper. They've got premium guys, they've got depth, they've got bullpen, they've got all those things that they had sometimes last year because they really finished the year with 4 or 5 guys they believed in. They're going to have twice that many now. And because of that, you aren't going to need to score as many runs. You're going to be able to pitch better. And I'm a believer in the Van Horn system, and I just feel like they're going to be one of the teams to beat nationally. They were last year, and they just ran out of pitching, and I think they've remedied that. And as a result, Arkansas would be one of my favorites to win the whole thing, right? And certainly there are a lot of challengers, especially they're playing in the SEC West, and you got LSU, and A&M's going to be really good, and of course you never know what Alabama and Auburn, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, they're all going to be challenging games, but I think right now I would pick Arkansas to win the West, which means I'm probably, picking them as one of the top teams in the entire country. And a big part of that is, they had some deficiencies that they've addressed on the mound. And, there's also that pedigree, that, that confidence that you have that Dave is he's going to have them ready when it matters.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I totally agree. And I understand the concerns about the offense for Arkansas, but the next time that Arkansas doesn't find a way to get like $1.25 on the dollar for their offensive players will be the first time. Like, they just do a really good job in the portal. They have a bunch of guys that are a little bit better than they were last year. Right. And that works. And so you mentioned the Dave Van Horn formula. I just think that's like winning is the Dave Van Horn formula.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, you ask any coach, they're one of the most challenging teams to play for because they don't beat themselves and they put pressure on you. Right. And And typically especially in Fayetteville, you're going to make more mistakes than they do. And that,
Yeah.
in a tight game, that's the difference.
Yep. So the team I have no feel for, and you mentioned them a little bit earlier, the team I have no feel for is Auburn. And I should be clear, that doesn't mean I don't have faith they're going to be good, because
Yeah.
I, like Mark, am also now at a point where I'm like, you know what? They're just going to be good. Like,
Which
is it
is good,
Omaha?
right?
Is it Omaha good? I don't know. Is it Host good? I don't know. But they'll be good. They'll figure it out. But that being said, I don't have a good feel for what that looks like, right? I mean, there's a lot of questions like, is Joseph Gonzalez part of this? I don't know. Like, what does the rotation look like if he's not involved? I don't know. They lost some veterans in the lineup. So like, who helps Ike Irish in the lineup? We'll see, Um, so we've got these questions. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I have a lot of faith. But man, if you forced me to write out Auburn's lineup, or hey, if somebody said, hey, if I told you Auburn wins 42 games and hosts a regional and challenges to go to Omaha, explain to me how that happened. Like, I would have no idea. But I'd believe it. So again, just because I don't have a feel doesn't mean I don't think they'll be good, but that's the team that feels a little bit mysterious to me at this point in time.
Yeah, I think they'll have more pitching depth than last year. But Gonzalez is a huge part of that, right? So, because everybody else ships back a day if he's right. So, and then offensively, obviously Irish, and where does he play? Is he the catcher? Is he the DH? Cooper McMurray's back. Bobby Pierce is back. You do have some older veteran guys in the middle of that lineup, but they're going to need some, and Stanfield, the leadoff guy. They're going to have a few guys back, but they're going to need some of those portal additions and newcomers to step forward if they're going to get where they want to go. Which, it's so tough to pick the West right now. And honestly, if you go into to my side of this answer, I have really two teams that I kind of jockeyed back and forth against. I guess I'll talk about both. The first one is Alabama. I was able to see them this fall, and I was impressed. Right, all those new players, but how are they going to all mesh together? I mean, it's almost an entirely new offensive group. They do have some pitching back, but even those guys are in different roles. A lot of them are. So they're Rob Bond's done a good job everywhere he's been, but this is a step up. And you're Alabama, and you're one of the have-nots in the SEC, and it is hard every week. So I do think that that's a team that I wouldn't be surprised if they're a regional club. I wouldn't be surprised if they're maybe a little bit better than that. I also wouldn't be surprised if they finish last. So they've just got such a wide variety based on all those new players. The other team I can't quite get a handle on is Ole Miss. And I think that because they've, last year they had a star-studded offense and really didn't produce as we might have wanted them to. But they've added some pieces. They struggled on the mound. They just weren't deep enough, weren't good enough in some instances. A lot of those guys took lumps in their back, and they should be better. What's our favorite thing to say? Guys are allowed to get better, and I think they will. And they've also added some pieces. So it's just one of those things where I don't know if we're kind of jaded because Mississippi State had had the bad year, and we all thought they would jump back, and they didn't. They jumped back a little, but not enough. We shouldn't just assume Ole Miss is going to jump back. We also shouldn't assume they're not, right? Two totally different scenarios. Just because they're in the same state, and they won the title, before, doesn't mean they're going to follow the same pattern. So that for me is a bit of just a mystery on how they're going to respond talent-wise. They should be right back where they usually are. I just until you see it, and with so much competition that you're going to face week in, week out, it's kind of a leap of faith.
Totally agree. I mean, I keep going back to the fact that I have a really hard time imagining back-to-back bad Mike Bianco teams, but I had a hard time imagining back-to-back bad Mississippi State teams, right? So such is life. So that is a fascinating one for me as well. Shout out also to Texas A&M, a team that I assume they're going to be pretty good, but like how much better is the pitching, if at all? Like, just some questions there. I feel a little more sure of them because I like the offensive pieces a lot, but we will see on them as well. That is going to do it for this edition of Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. That's what we do and don't know about the SEC. Notice there's a lot more we don't know than we do know. Mark and I have never tried to pass off that we're that smart, honestly. No. Like you'll never hear us say that.
And we're not very good at picking games. Okay.
Right.
So
actually, you know what, Mark? That is actually not true. You and I finished first and second in D1 Baseball's.
Yeah, but it's a low bar, man.
Picks thing. Well, I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying, like, relative to the field, we don't have to be the fastest guy. We just have to be running away from the bear. We just have to be faster than the slowest guy. You know. Yeah. You and I did a good job, but not particularly.
Yeah,
we're not the brightest bulbs in the box. You know.
Yeah, I have a few skills. That is not one I tout.
Indeed. So that's what we do and don't know about the SEC. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Highway to Hoover. Thank you, as always, to Pitch Logic, our title sponsor here at Highway to Hoover. Thank you, the listener, as always, for listening. Thank you, Mark.